we live here because it snows. And I was like, maybe we should change that. In any event, great Sunday morning to you guys. Today we're going to talk about you do all the right things and you still find yourself alone, right? I didn't spend a ton of time on this week. Normally during the week, I'll print it out, have it on my desk, read it every day, and ask my wife questions, ask other friends questions about it. And this one was something that I wanted to kind of hold on to my own because it's about seclusion, right? And to me, there's this dichotomy that exists in Stoicism, and rightfully so. And Mike has correctly pointed it out before that the moment you call yourself a Stoic, you've lost the objective of what this entire thing is, right? Let's see if I can, hold on, I got some technical issues here. Sorry. All right, there we go. Hopefully I'm a little better. All right, so if you go around calling yourself a Stoic, you've lost the objective because Stoicism is not about the identity of yourself as anything. It's not about presenting your ego in any way, shape, or form. It's about living your life. It's just about actions. Now, if you're going to take a Stoic sage perspective that somebody like Seneca did, or Marcus Aurelius, somebody that has attained a level of Stoic practice that is so ingrained in who they are that they're able to expertly talk about it and give it to others. We're none of that. We are people that are all holding each other's hands, trying to figure it out together, right? So you're trying to attain that sage level and say you do. And if you do all of the things that Seneca talks about, where you waste nothing, the moment you wake, you realize your body is there to be used for work, and you do that until your body says, okay, I'm time to sleep again. And I personally always had this thought of that constant use of wasting time. Like what I'm doing right now, I know for a fact is just for my ego, to stroke it, to entertain it, to give me something that gets me away from the uncomfortableness as much as possible. But if you stay in that uncomfortable mindset and you do work all the time, your body's going to let you know when you're tired. If you avoid distractions that don't matter to you, social media, reading the news, engaging in sports that you're not playing, you're taking time away from work that you could be doing. And this is what Seneca talks about, that if you really envelop and identify as a philosopher, your entire existence should be devoted to that. The same way you could argue with any strict religious, trying to think of the Hasidic Jews, or Sharia Islam, or a very, very constrained, conservative, radical understanding and living of that religion, you're going to live a pretty monk type existence. Same thing with philosophy. If you're really going to live that sage life, aren't you excluding so many of the comfortable leisures and luxuries that everybody has at their disposal nowadays, that most people have at their disposal? And this letter that Seneca writes, I think, is really about paying attention to and being aware of the fact that this is what you're trying to attain here. If this is what you're doing this stuff for, this is the life you're looking at. And if that life does not look attractive to you, if you can't see where the happiness can be found within this life, you need to take a step back. So I took a step back this week and looked at all of this. I really asked myself some questions, guys. Like, why am I doing this? Why do I take an hour and sometimes two out of my morning to talk to people that I've never met about a topic that I've never been schooled on? It's this philosophy. Sure, I took in college, right? But you take a couple, 3 semesters and you just learn about the nuts and bolts of Stoicism. My practice of Stoicism, going back almost 6 years now, has been daily. It has been constant. And the fruits of the labor, I think personally, it's changed my life. But looking forward now, like, what are you doing this for? Is this the life that you really want? And it's easy for me to answer. It's so easy for me to answer. Every time that I kind of gave myself that opportunity to self-analyze and present myself with an answer to some of these questions, they all came back and said, yes, this is the life that you need for happiness. And I also engaged some conversations with people this week to try to really narrowly construe the idea that I'm after of it is a seclusion, because there aren't many people, the masses here that we're talking about. You guys come across people every day in your life who are not philosophers, who are not Stoic, who are quite ignorant, who do not act in ways that are logical or rational. I'm in a world professionally where I'm surrounded by people consumed with emotions, and it is my job to separate those emotions And it really is, it's almost my entertainment, really sad to say, that I come across so many people that are so wrapped up in emotions that it's like, guys, if you could just take a step back and realize that your problem is all self-created. But so in reading this letter this week, that's kind of what I took away from it, is I'm on the right path, that I'm not seeking out a life that is luxury. I'm not seeking out a life that is comfort. I'm not seeking out the riches. I'm not seeking out the American dream. You guys covered crowds last week. And first off, shout out to Mike. Sir, I listened to your guys' things last week. Brilliant. I should actually probably shut up and let him take over, because I know Seneca's his bro, and he's got so many great things to say about him. But I love when he comes back and lets me know that all the things I'm doing wrong. But sorry, I lost my train of thought. So yeah, getting into this idea of what it means to be a philosopher in practice, and adding to taking that, coupling that with crowds and the rest of the masses, and your friends and the people you see on TV and everybody you come in contact with, what percentage of those people act in a stoic way? And I know you can find that because as you practice this more and more, you start to see things that are very stoic in nature. A lot of the books that I read now, passages that I come across, I go, there's something stoic about that. Gary John Bishop, who I've been raving about for a while, nearly everything in his books and his materials is rooted in Stoic philosophy, as it should be. Come across many, many folks on here who have an overlap with Buddhism. And it's, again, I'm not saying it's Stoicism from the Stoa in Greek and Aurelius, but it's the idea, it's the philosophy, it's the concept around all of these things that have a ton of overlap. So while you can call it Buddhism, who was created by an individual, or Stoa that was created by individuals over time and things like that, they've all had overlap to me. And this idea that if you're gonna enjoy this life, you have to first acknowledge that it's not going to be like the rest of them. But once you're in it, it's like being the sober person at a party, right? You look at everybody else around you and go, I know you guys look like you think you're having fun, but I know what tomorrow morning looks like. And then I know that tomorrow morning I'm going to wake up fulfilled, happy, and ready to take on my day. And I know you guys are not. So it's kind of having that foresight, right? So I want to talk to you guys about your seclusion and loneliness, and how this, why are we already have this, why we do this type of thing, but why do you guys continue to do this? Have you accepted the idea that once you've attained a certain level of this sagedom, your life is going to be very boring, right? It's just about doing what's right. There's nothing sexy about it. You're I was just about to say you're probably not going to change the world in some monumental way, but that's not true at all. If that's your purpose, you absolutely could. But it's still, you're certainly not going to be the president of the United States today, probably. You're probably not going to be this grandiose, famous person, because you got to shut down that ego. So then you're left with this very quiet, existence that I love. So I'll talk to you guys about all that stuff. So anybody got anything today? I'm so glad you guys all survived daylight savings time. I barely did.
Hi, Eric. I wanted to say, Mike, thanks for everything. Eric, congratulations. I see you have a second group on Wednesday, which I would have attended. It was Women's Day International, and I was already booked with some ladies, but definitely will be there Wednesday coming up. So you're talking, I took a couple of notes as my nails are drying on me, but of inclusion and seclusion, I always try to flip it in my area of expertise. What I do is awareness, but can we apply to anything? So you're in the foster care system, and you two are in exclusive seclusion, as they try to match you with a family that will keep caring for you for as long as possible, in order to flip it to secluded inclusion, a nuclear family that will care for you forever, and so on and so forth. But you can also flip it again to get, what did I write here? To get seclusion, but versus exclusion, like when they did the mass suicide, or they're attempting to say that's a good elderly care because they didn't populate with enough young to care for them when they're growing old. So that is what Japan is facing, with some people suggesting that. So they had excluded everyone because they didn't want to cross over, so they don't have enough. where Canada is multicultural. We have everything and we have a lot of people. And obviously you're in the US, you have everyone. So, and the only other thing I thought of as well was when you're saying when we read and try and comprehend what Stoicism is about, is only because like when we all have started to learn to read in great kindergarten, I'm assuming we learn the letters and then they're teaching us how to read. But then when we get to 8, 9, 10, a light bulb goes on in our heads and we begin to read to learn. So we choose what we want to consume. So yeah, that's what I got up to now. I know you have so much to share.
I don't really, as you were speaking, I love what you say about the exclusive part of it. You're absolutely right. And this is voluntary seclusion, okay? And if you're voluntarily secluding yourself, my question is, what are you missing out on, or what is that being replaced by, or what's the opposite of that? And I love that you said exclusion, right? Because you're excluding yourself from things. And as part of that voluntary seclusion is also the voluntary exclusion. And going to back what you guys talked about last week with crowds, one of the themes that I kind of had this week in talking with my friends was thinking for yourself. I had a lot of conversations with Christians and Muslims. Sadly, I couldn't find any of my Jewish friends to talk to, but I have always been very interested in why people don't exclude themselves from activities if they're practicing members of a religion. And the same can be asked of philosophers. Why aren't you voluntarily excluding yourself from activities that you know are not in line with your purpose or not in line with the ideas that you're trying to follow? Same thing with religion, So I have a friend of mine who drinks heavily, and he's Muslim, and he follows his religion in every other shape or form. He's not like just as I would say, growing up a Christian, a holiday and wedding type Muslim. He is at his mosque 3 or 4 times a week, but he drinks way too much to the point that I'm concerned about him. So we had conversations about that. But in that conversation was, why are you not excluding this activity if you so rightfully believe in the core belief that you shouldn't put any substance in your body like that? And he admitted that he had become a slave to it and he was addicted to it. And we have, he's going to seek medical advice, but he had lost his willpower in that. And I understood what he was going through, because on smaller bits, there are parts of me in my stoicism. Like, I know that I shouldn't ever get angry. My God, this week with my son, guys, I was terrible. He is 3.5. And it is everyday emotion versus logic. And I lost every time this week. Ralph, I see you up. I'm going to finish that. And the floor is yours, brother. But every time I lost it, I had a solo parenting night this week. And it was just one thing after another. It was like, and I had these plans. I had these grandiose expectations that we're going to do Costco, then we'll do the bounce house, then we're going to dinner. And not one of those things happened. And it was like, I got in the car at one point and I was like, fucking be stoic, dude. What are you doing? Like, fall back to what you know, fall back on your training, fall back to what you know is going to get you out of this mindset. And I've said it before, the most fascinating thing to me about humans is you know what you're supposed to do and you still choose not to do it. And in the moment, I was excluding myself from logic and ration and not going back to Ralph's stop and not doing it. I was just letting myself be involved in it. And thankfully, I had about a 20-minute drive where it took me 20 minutes to calm myself down for my son, 3-year-old. I'm like, of all the crap that you've done in your life, you can't pull yourself away and not be frustrated with this kid who's just trying to have fun, right? And I told that story to my friend in alcoholism. And I said, you're doing the same thing that I'm doing. You're not voluntarily excluding yourself from things because you know what's there. You can't do it and you need help. The same way that thankfully I had a car ride to calm me down. If I hadn't, I didn't know what I needed to do. So I need help. So I have therapy. That's what my therapist and I talked about this week. All my frustration with my son and my anger, and when those moments of my face getting red hot pop up, and I had to go out and seek itself. Because I knew the stoicism by itself wasn't going to help me with that problem, that I have a legit temper issue with my son. But the idea that you wouldn't exclude yourself from other things that are in line with your philosophy, I think there's been a problem for me and many people. So I want to hear what you have to say about that. Anyways, I'll shut up. Ralph. Hey, Ralph, you're muted if you wanted to talk, brother.
Sorry. One thing I think about, and that I appreciate you guys saying all that, is that I actually just had an interesting experience. I'm on vacation right now, and I'm actually going to punch out early because I got to check out of this hotel. But I saw something yesterday. We were walking to this restaurant to get some crabs, and there was this guy. There was this group of people with like a sound system, like on a bridge, and they had like a megaphone and all that, and they were talking about Jesus. And there was a couple, and there was like a guy and a woman, I guess, and they were kind of like having a debate with this person, and they were talking about Christianity or whatever. I didn't really listen too much into it, but the one thing I noticed is that the person that had the microphone, they would state their points using the microphone, even though this person is like 2 feet from them. And then the guy without the mic, who's just like coming to debate or whatever, he didn't have a mic. So like, of course, the guy who has the microphone, even if he's fucking wrong, he's going to get blown out in the argument because he's like, it's just going to be like, oh, they're louder. So even on like a base instinctual level, like the person who's louder could win. You have to like interpret like the person who's quieter and whether they win or not. And when I think about Stoicism, seclusion, exclusion, inclusion, is that sometimes life just presents a path to you. So if you are, I feel like if I'm provided a path where like it makes a lot of sense to build a cabin in the woods and commune with nature, maybe that's what I need in that moment where I separate from society and I have the opportunity to have this like log cabin in the woods and sustain myself off of the land. And I'm in a locale where there's not a lot of other predators like bears and lions and shit. And I can sustain myself, then stoically, hopefully I can look at that and then follow that path. And then same if an urban environment or being in a city or a rural environment makes more sense, then I follow that. Like if I lose my leg, I'm not going to try to play basketball against people with both of their legs. I'm not going to try to like swim against people that have both their legs. Or I have to be comfortable with that constant defeat or climbing uphill to prevent that. Maybe I could dunk on somebody that has both their legs, but I have to understand that I'm climbing uphill. And I feel with like stoicism, I try to have no expectations about any of that stuff. If on my gravestone they write Ralph, the best stoic of all time, like that's not what I'm going for. And it's purely just based off of consequence and the opportunity that's presented himself in life. So I think that sometimes depending on what life presents to me, I'll follow some seclusion because it just makes a lot of sense. Sometimes taking $500 and putting it in a mutual fund and then staying home and reading a book on a Friday is better than dropping $500 at the casino. Maybe, I don't know. It depends on what life presents to me. And then hopefully I have the wherewithal to objectively look at it. Like, did I really need to put $500 in my mutual fund? Maybe I needed to go have a cheeseburger and play some blackjack. Who knows? So that's what I think about that. I'm just trying to live a life of minimized suffering. And I think that sometimes being secluded is a good idea, but it's not a permanent solution to everything.
Yeah. First of all, first thing I took away from that is, man, we got to go party with Ralph. $500 for a Friday night. I think I got away with like $80 last night. My wife still laughed at me, or yelled at me rather.
Oh yeah, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble from yesterday. Don't even look at my credit card statement.
Hey, look, we're still paying for Mexico, so we will be for a while. Yeah, the only thing I'll say to that, Ralph, is I've always for a long time had this fantasy of either faking my own death or just getting away from society, getting off the grid and getting everybody. Like when I get fed up with it, like that's where I always end up going to first. Is like, God, life would be awesome if I could have my Ted Kaczynski house in the woods and nobody bugged me, be completely self-sufficient. Like I hate to say this out loud, but remember when Eric Rudolph, the Atlanta bomber who bombed all of the abortion clinics and stuff like that, he was on the run for years in the Appalachians. And I would like often be like, that guy's still out there. Like nobody can catch him. He's just living his life. Like awesome. I mean, he's a fucking murderer and a criminal, but still the idea that you just go out there for years and live with nobody bugging you, like that sounds amazing. It is not for me. And I have since taken the idea of I can do all of that within society. I can escape from all of you guys just by not paying attention to you. And like when I go out in nature, when we were in Mexico, I sat on the beach for like an hour and just stared at the waves. I was like, I love this. This is what I need, this connection with nature. And I was like, nature's still around me. It's covered up by concrete and buildings and things like that, but I can still get the sense of being a napier, just ignore the people around me kind of a thing. So that's how I've bridged the gap to that fantasy of, wanting to go, oh, and then faking my own death. Still think about that often, guys. I have the best plan you've never heard of. I'm telling you, anyone who legit wants to do it, let me know. It's going to work. I guarantee you. All you need is a high-speed car chase, a bridge, and a motorcycle. I'm telling you, we'll get this done. Anyways, I'll shut up. Michael, what you got, man?
I think I saw that in a cartoon.
Good.
So I have like a million different thoughts, but I'll isolate them. One of the beauties of reading these letters is I can look at these letters and say, how does it apply to my life, right? Not the life that I think I should have, but my life as it sits. And when I look at this letter, I'm always going to also look at it by what's on my mind today or what's been on my mind this week. And this talk about seclusion, right? So he went into this voluntary seclusion. And Eric, just to take a real life example from what was just spoken, you went into a voluntary seclusion. You went in this 20-minute car ride to process all your Stoic principles and shit in your head and decide, how can I apply this, to my situation? And where my mind has been this week-ish is, if I can have a man cave, why can't I have a Stoic cave, right? A place that I go to just study. Because even notice what, he's not saying here that he's just going there to lay in the sun and to have a drink. He studied, he wrote, he processed, he dealt with shit inside his seclusion. And so I don't have the luxury of going 24/7 into a voluntary seclusion to do all this work, right? I mean, he retired from work to go into a life of seclusion, which was probably more work than what he was doing when he was employed, right? And so where are my opportunities in my day? Where are my opportunities in my week? Just to go into that seclusion, to work with the things that I want, I want to work on. I hesitate to say what I need to work on, right? But the things that I want to work on, because going off to that island and hiding, or the mountaintop, that's very Epicurean, right? You went away to process your shit. Epictetus and the rest were like, how do I process my stuff here and now in this life here? I don't have to escape 2,000 miles away. I could just go 2 feet away to my little Stoic cave. And so that's what I've been kind of processing this week. Is, I'll be honest with you, it's like, where the hell in my house am I going to put my Stoic cave? Because right now it's kind of spread all over the place.
You make a really good point, Michael, and this is something I've thought about before, is contingent happiness. And it's one of the reasons I love Stoicism. So many other religions, philosophies, ways of thinking, the American dream, something has to happen in order for happiness to follow. Epicurus, I'm going to go to the mountain and then I will find my happiness. You and your man cave, I will have the man cave and I will find my happiness there. Stoicism tells you that's not true at all, that your happiness can be found exactly where you sit right now, because you get to make the choice in your head. That's it. Irregardless, regardless, irrelevant to your own actions is what's going on assigned you. It's if you live in a desert and you wanted a mountain to climb to find serenity, you're not going to get it. You can find it in your own head. If you're a prisoner, for a crime you didn't commit, you can still find that own happiness in your own head. You're not getting your Stoic cave in a cell with your partner, kind of thing, right? And I talked a lot about this week with hypotheticals with people, and they like to throw Stoic principles back in my face, because you can say something like, what if you become a paraplegic or quadriplegic and you can't have? What if the things you find happiness now are taken away from you? Those are contingent activities, the same way that I'm talking about you having contingent activities to find happiness, right? But that's the point of Stoicism, is preparing yourself for those on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's the active practice right here and now. So to me, there's 2 schools of thought, which is the preparation for the future uncomfort and suffering that I'm going to be able to get myself through. But in that preparation comes this current present ability to find happiness in your own existence right now. So in my life, there is not he talks about this. There is no moment in my life where I'm not doing things, that I'm just idle. And that's the same with me. It has taken me a long time to get to this point, because I've taken stock of the time that I spend in my day. I would spend hours playing video games. I would spend hours talking on social media, debating on social, yelling on social media, doing all of these things. And it was like, for what? Spend time eating and drinking that I didn't need. He talks about it in here. Your body and nature is going to tell you exactly what you need. When you're tired and you need to sleep, you're going to go to sleep. When you wake up, that's when you're supposed to wake up. When you're thirsty, you're going to need to take a drink. When you're hungry, you're going to need food. When you need to be covered from shelter, you're going to be covered from shelter. But you don't need a gold roof. You don't need the finest Cavassier. You don't need caviar. You don't need the finest clothes. The world and nature is going to tell you exactly what you want. The rest of your time that you have, which is a fuck ton. That's a literal metric that can be distinguished by something somewhere. A fuck ton of time that you have that you spend on all those other things that don't matter. What if you took all of that time and put it towards a purpose? Not specifically philosophy, not specifically in a Stoic cave, just trying to be the next, Seneca or somebody else, but put it in line with your purpose. That's how you find your happiness. Now, certainly, I think there's an element to Stoicism and philosophy in general that has a very large component of compassion and giving back to men to make sure that you're falling in line with our purpose as a humanity and a species to ensure our survival. And ensuring our survival in a happy way is passing down these lessons we've learned. So one of the things he talked about that I had a hard time with was he talks about doing the work to provide the knowledge for future generations, right? And I'm like, ooh, isn't that a little bit of a legacy thing? But it's not, because again, if you're going back to, you have to provide wisdom to people that are not wise. If you've found the answer, the universal truth in an answer, and that everybody else in the room, you get 100 people in the room, they'll go, yeah, we agree, that's the way to do it. That needs to be written down, and that needs to be shown to other people. And I think that's what he's talking about. And look, by the fact that we're still talking about his letters, he was right. So I got over that idea really, really quickly. It's not a legacy or an ego thing. It goes back to what we talked about before of, spreading knowledge that needs to be spread kind of a way. So I love the idea that you certainly should be looking for a Stoic man cave, right? I love that idea. And you should certainly find time to set aside in your day to do these things. But you first need to take stock of what you have. We all have 24 hours in a day. What are you doing with it? The 24 hours in a day that I used 10 years ago was like everybody else I think I see around me now, that I was not happy. I wasn't finding the happiness because the activities I was engaged in, they were consumption. I was consuming so many things because they were comfortable and entertaining. And that's what I felt was going to recharge me. We have a theme in my household and my friends that you don't come at me with consumption. You better have some production. I'll consume your production. I'll consume the production of the people that are in my existence, my reality, my friends. I'm not consuming the production of some Hollywood producer or some guy that wrote a book on vacation about his life. I want to produce those things myself. In order to produce things, you've got to set time aside in your day, right? So first, take stock of your day. Take stock of what you're doing in your time. Take stock of what you're doing on vacation. Because the one thing I found is like when I went on vacation to Mexico 5 years ago, I would have been drunk the entire time. This time I was only drunk about 30% of the time. But the other time was spent doing things that were really meaningful to my purpose, sitting on the beach for an hour alone thinking, talking with people at a bar about life, not about their bodies or what they're doing or their fun they're having, but about their experiences and their concepts of humanity and what we're doing. And sitting with a homeless man and saying, is there some way that I can help you achieve fulfillment and happiness rather than giving you the money in my pocket? Those are the kind of things that I do when I'm on vacation. And those are the things that refresh and recharge me. But it's a seclusion away from my everyday life. It's a chance for me to get out and see the world that I live in that I can't through a TV screen or an internet forum. Because up till this trip, I was on Reddit every day, trying to find the best deals, trying to find the best boat to get over to Cozumel. I was consumed by this trip. When I was in it, I didn't care about any of that stuff. I just wanted to be around the people and what I could see in front of me. And I did it. It was great. It was a perfect trip. I loved it. And then when I got back to work, obviously it probably took me a day and a half to get back in the groove of things. But the seclusion that I have now in my life, that when I purposely and voluntarily seclude myself, the work that I do in that seclusion isn't beneficial to me anymore. I'm not stroking my own ego. I'm not making myself comfortable. I'm doing the work for others. And I really come from a mindset of, first off, how can I serve others? And you guys have shown me that first I need to serve myself. So my first question is, Eric, what can you do for yourself to make yourself a better human, better able to love others? The second thing is, what can I do for others? For me personally, I can be a better host of this meeting. I can be a better Stoic to my friends. So that's how I treat my seclusion now. Michael.
Hey, how you doing, man?
Good. Seriously, wish we had another hour.
Hey, so I am truly conflicted by this, to be really honest with you. I think one of the quote that comes to mind around how conflicted I am about the sense of isolation is is what Aristotle says. He said, to be alone, one must be either an animal or a god, right? And I think that what he was trying to say there is, it can take you to another level, and it can also break you down. And I think that kind of sums up the dichotomy that I have in my mind around isolation. And again, if you were to, just like Michael said earlier, I tend to take these things and figure out how applicable it is to life today, even though you've heard me say many times that when you go back and you look at first century Rome, a lot of problems that we face today, they were going through those problems. And so I like to use that as my baseline. I do think there are two different types of isolation. One is forced isolation. And when you look at forced isolation and the benefits of that, you can go back and look at, Viktor Frankl, right? Viktor Frankl was, during the Nazi era, he was imprisoned. He went for days and months without speaking with anybody. And that forced isolation, he talked about potentially going crazy until he was able to find purpose, right? And he developed an entire class of psychotherapy or studying psychotherapy by just going through that. When you look at modern psychology, it talks about people who are imprisoned, right? And how that can be considered to be torture, right? A matter of fact, I think the United Nations actually considers long isolation to be a form of torture. And so therein lies the conflict that I have. And and then again, you would read these peer review articles, and it will tell you again about what the brain needs, right? For example, without certain sustenance in terms of practicing communication and doing certain things, you can lose brain activity, right? So again, I don't have any right answer. I do know that for me, right, I spend a lot of time, because I think Eric, Gail, a few people on this call know I live by myself. So I spend a great deal of time, reading, watching YouTube. I should exercise more. I got this thing downstairs that I'm not using, but I really should start using it, to be honest with you. But the point is, I think what I'm trying to do is, and I don't have an answer, but I know that self-imposed isolation sometimes is good because you're doing it for a reason, to achieve something, right? Forced isolation can be devastating, right? Unless, like Viktor Frankl, you're able to find meaning and find purpose within that forced isolation. One, you're doing it for a reason. The other one, you're being forced into it, and the outcome can be very different. I do like what Seneca says. Everybody know that, that I revere Seneca, but I also understand that, reading through Seneca's life, Seneca was a very flawed man, right? And so, and I'm not saying that everything that, there are some things that Seneca says that I take with a grain of salt. I don't. I just sometimes have to give or put my own spin on some of the things, right? So, so it make more sense to me, because again, like Michael says earlier, I am living my own reality, right? And so things are going to mean something to me based on my own reality. Some things I can apply to my reality, and some things may not fit so well into my reality. And I think, when we talk about isolation, I think it's very, very important that we kind of put it in its full context. It is a good thing, but it also, I personally believe that it can be a bad thing. Go ahead.
So I think I want to say first, you talked a lot about the idea of being alone, right? The isolation. And I didn't see that in this so much. I saw more of the seclusion. This first line, he talks about withdrawing from men. And like I talked about with Michael, I didn't see that so much as going up to the mountain by yourself. It's just withdrawing from men socially and any idea, right? And I think that I do that all the time. I don't isolate anymore, other than I will take, it's well known in circles of my friends that about once every 2 months, I will disappear for a day and just walk in nature. It's what I do. It's what I've done since I was a kid. Then I'll just go like 24 hours. I'll just go up and just start walking day and night. It's what I do. It's how I kind of find my center again. So that's the only isolation that I prescribe to. But I would agree with you, Mike, that isolation in other certain terms is absolutely torture, 100% torture. I remember hearing about some kind of crazy house in California that's like that's a haunted house type thing or something like that. They put you in this room that has no sound, no depth resensation, and like it's the scariest thing. Apparently nobody's ever completed 24 hours of it. And it's the idea that you can't be left alone with just your thoughts. And that's a scary thing. That's like a mental health thing to me too, that you should never be left alone, completely alone, without the ability to converse with other people. So I took a lot more of seclusion in this sense of withdrawing from men, not isolation. But on your topic of isolation, as you were talking about Viktor Frankl, right before you said his name, I thought my man Mason is going to know about forced isolation. He's going to know about being forced into a situation where you're by yourself and you have to do things, because in the military, they force you to do things you don't want to do. But you realize very quickly when you're left to your own devices with the motivation that somebody else has tasked you with, you get shit done. It's an amazing way. If you've ever had a project that you're really into and somebody says, I'm going to leave you alone to do it, and you have one of those nights where you're working, all night to get stuff done, if you're left alone with the motivation to do things, it can be amazing. So that isolation in those terms, I think, can be great. That forced isolation where you're supposed to do something like that. Now, obviously, Viktor Frankl's isolation, and that's a lot different. And there is so much to be said about finding happiness in that type of isolation that he did, and finding retooling your purpose in the way that he did. So if you're ever into a forced isolation situation that you don't want to be in, Stoicism is the path to help you find that happiness. But I think there is certainly something to be said. And also remember this, okay? Seneca was a philosopher. That was his purpose. That was his job. So when he talks about I'm taking time to write down these things for future generations and taking time to really be a true, or truly seclude myself as a philosopher, I just picture him in his 60s, not wanting to talk to anybody because he's working day and night. Well, that's his purpose. That's what he has to do. Eric Ruth, when I'm in my 60s, I'm not going to be sitting in a room somewhere writing down. I'm going to be on a beach somewhere drinking Mai Tais. I guarantee it. That will be my purpose at that point. Because I'm not the philosopher. That's not who I am. But his purpose was. So that makes sense to me in that sense. So that, when you're talking about the dichotomy of it, Mike, and applying his life to yours, I'm like, brother, you're Mike doing your own thing. You're not Seneca. You don't have the flaws that he had because you weren't presented with the journey that he had. You didn't have to deal with the fucking headache of Nero that he had to deal with, right? So it's there. I absolutely see what you're talking about, of trying to take the mileage as you want with what he says and not taking all of this. But I think there's so much to be had about the idea of shunning people and men and their ideas and the crowds that you guys talked about last week to get your purpose done. That's why I took away with it. So thank you very much, Mike, for saying that. Michael, now, what else you got?
So, you know, I'm thinking about what Mike said about that dichotomy there, right? And there's actually, I see two. There's obviously the dichotomy between the voluntary isolation or seclusion, let's just call it seclusion, and forced seclusion, right? And obviously what Seneca's talking about here is the voluntary. What am I going to do with my retirement, right? And this is what I want to do in my retirement. But I think we can also take that and apply it to a second dichotomy, which is a voluntary seclusion that's inspiring versus a voluntary seclusion that sucks, right? And so what Seneca did there was he dove into the things that really absorbed him and he was very passionate about, right? You know, studying all day and writing letters to everybody is not my thing, right? But for him, that was how he was reaching into his highest self, right? And turning around and just making it all worthwhile, so to say. And so if I'm ever in a situation where I'm in a forced seclusion, kind of like Frankel in a concentration camp, I don't want to say try to make the best of it, right? Because this all goes down to what's the difference between 2,000 years ago and today? Nothing, because our faculty of reason has always been there and has been challenging for mankind forever, right? So how we look at something and believe about something and process something. Um, Going back to my Stoic cave kind of example, I'm not going to be sitting here kicking out letters to Eric and Gay and Mike. I promise you. But what I can do in that time is, this is going to sound cheesy and I don't mean it literally, but how am I writing letters to myself? Right? How am I using that time to uh, close that gap between where I am and where I want to be? And then the last thing, just to flip a little bit, just to, because what Mike said really something came up from within me, which is sometimes maybe too much seclusion is too much, right? Whether it be forced or voluntary. You know, so what am I doing in the likes of Seneca to go out there to find things that I'm really passionate about? If I totally absorb myself in just reading 2000 ancient manuscripts and I'm not saying you're doing this, Mike, by the way, I'm not, but but if I'm only reading ancient manuscripts or I'm only going to meetups that are about Stoicism, what am I doing for fun to start crawling out of that shell, right? How am I even putting myself into situations where I can apply the shit I learned in my Stoic studies, either to my life or even like Eric, you said, you know, to friends. Eric, you know, a little bit because we had a brief email exchange. I work with a lot of people each week, right? So I apply the Stoic principles, you know, in that situation. And I could easily make my life 24/7 Stoicism. And I'm not a pro. I'm talking about the study and practice. And so what am I doing for fun? And so breaking out of that as well and to bring balance to my life. I don't think, and I'll end with this, I don't think the Stoics ever thought that we should just go into this seclusion and just be studying 24/7. The reason we have to study 24/7 is to keep reaching towards our higher self, but they never said don't have fun. They said don't go into excess, right? And then somewhere even in this letter down the line, you know, all these things, fancy houses and fancy cars and whatever. Of course, he didn't talk about cars back then, but you get the idea. But what are the things that I do for fun that can keep me sane while I'm trying to reach my sanity, aka higher self?
You know, I think, thanks, Michael. You're absolutely right that you can't do that because, again, you're not a philosopher. You're not trying to be the next Seneca. If you're trying to be the next Seneca, then that's probably what you should be. As you're talking, I'm sitting there thinking, I'm raising my son as stoically as possible. And I can't wait until he's actually talking instead of pissing me off to have these conversations with him. But what if he decided that he was going to be the next Seneca? That was his profession. Funny or not, I'm getting ready to go have lunch with a woman that I met recently who is a doctor of philosophy. Every degree she has since high school has been in philosophy. And I was like, I need to talk to you because you've got a job that pertains to philosophy. Let's go talk about it. So I'm really looking forward to talking with her. And that her existence is a lot different than mine. So her seclusion and what she thinks about philosophy versus mine as a lawyer is going to be different in our free time. My free time has, typically been repairing the scars of my soul that I'm living with as a lawyer, whereas her free time is a lot different. And it's so true. We talked about our free time, like my free times are spending time during the week, working out, to having a drink or two and spending time with my wife. She's like going to talks. She's going to these meetups. She's doing so many more erudite things than I am. But that's her course. That's her journey. And if your purpose, and here's the other thing is I was very intimidated to call myself this to her, but I have often referred to myself as a Stoic hedonist. And it's my belief that every free chance I get, any chance I have an opportunity to indulge in pleasure, I will. And as long as it stays within moderation, I can still call myself a Stoic, right? So I've told you before, I live this life, and Ralph and I have had these conversations before about Friday afternoon when I'm done with work until, Monday morning, except for this meeting, I'm going to do whatever I want to do in a hedonist fashion, always in moderation, never a slave to anything, person, idea, or concept. But I found so much fulfillment in that. And that's my purpose in life, is to be the best husband, lawyer, host meetup that I can be, but I find time to have fun on my own regard. So when I look at this idea of seclusion that he talks about, it's got to be completely subjective to your own life, right? Is it going to be physical seclusion versus mental seclusion? Is your seclusion going to be spent doing things is your seclusion going to be spent doing things that are in line with your purpose as a X, whatever that is, or a philosopher? And his philosophy seclusion that he talks about, I think, is the extreme. Like, this is somebody that tries to be the next Seneca. And if you're going to be the Stoic sage, this is the life you'd have to live. But I don't know if any of us have this purpose in life. Again, my son may be the one that's best suited to have this life because he's starting out from the beginning. All of us we're well into our careers. We've had past traumas that we didn't apply Stoicism to in the past, and we're trying to now, right? I've never met anybody that's like, yeah, I've been Stoic since I was 10 years old and I've lived this life and I have all this to gain from you. It's always people later in life like, my mom died, I don't know how to deal with it. I found Stoicism and now it makes sense to me, kind of a thing. And I would never expect those type of people, as like reformed Stoics or like later in life Stoics, to have this type of thing, because you have to apply your past journey and who you are to what you find happiness now. So you're absolutely right, Michael. You got to find time to have fun. You can't. And so what is, for somebody like me that is a casual practicing Stoic, what does my seclusion look like? And I was thinking as you were talking, Michael, about what's the minimum amount of work that you would tell somebody they would have to do to consider themselves a practicing Stoic? You're going to have to meditate. You're going to have to journal, right? So your seclusion should be based on those two things. That can take 10 minutes for some people. So your philosopher's seclusion for your entire 24-hour period in a day is 10 minutes. That's it. And I bet you somebody somewhere smarter than me could argue that that's all you needed to call yourself a practicing Stoic, if you can stay in line with the practice of it, right? But one thing I will argue is you cannot consider yourself a practicing Stoic if you're not practicing. And so far, we've identified the things that you must do, and you're going to have to journal, whether it's a physical writing it down or doing self-reflection. And I believe that it's got to be some sort of a meditation to get you prepared for your day. If you're not doing the work to self-analyze your actions and constantly apply Stoic, principles and ideas to what you hope your actions will be in the future, you're not going to do it. So the seclusion he's talking about really, to me, is the refinement of those practices and how much time you take away from your day. And then it's just a matter of how much time you can give yourself, right? So if you're a parent of 7 kids, you may only have 10 minutes a day. Try your best. If you're a single man living in, by yourself without any other responsibilities or obligations, you can probably devote a lot more time to that if you so choose. And that's in line with your purpose, right? So those are my thoughts on it. Mason, hello, sir.
I think that your point about what someone can allot to seclusion in their own practice is a great point. I was just about to bring up the idea that you have to consider that the difference between the lifestyles of humans, particularly in the Western world today, as opposed to individuals, including Seneca, 2,000 years ago, are vastly different in terms of not only obligations, distractions, but also means. Seneca was certainly a wealthy individual, but I'd say that we're probably about on par with certain lifestyle choices today, the average person. But you also have to consider that he was facing relatively extreme conditions for various points in his life in terms of exile to one location or another. And generally speaking, we don't experience much of that today. So some of these things, like Viktor Frankl's entire logotherapy, that was born out of such an extraordinarily extreme condition that, of course, it was useful to him and other people throughout his life and moving forward. But we also have to consider that sometimes the more extraordinary aspects that individuals will exhibit were born out of places that you wouldn't want to go through and that you were hopefully unlikely to experience in your own life.
You're absolutely right. This is going to sound terrible, Mason. I don't, no, hold on a second, Mike. I just want to say this, and this doesn't want to sound terrible, but I was sitting here thinking, as we're talking about Frank, and we talk about Seneca, we talk about all these things, we spend a lot of time talking about other people, and we have to be cautious not to compare ourselves to their lives. Take their words and take what you want out of them, but you're absolutely right, Mason, that the lives that they lived and the uncomfortable situations they found themselves in versus what we can find ourselves in now, we cannot compare our lives to them. You cannot compare your life and your existence to anybody else's journey. So take the words of what they have, just like I'm trying to do with the seclusion idea and how and plug it into my life. Because if you look at anybody else's life and go, I should be doing that, that's not true. You got to be doing what's within your own nature. So if you only want to take the 10 minutes a day, do it. If you can take 20 hours a day, do it, kind of a thing, right? So that wasn't what I thought that to me said. Sorry, Mike, interrupted you. I apologize.
No worries. So Mason, I agree with you up to a point. Whenever I read someone, I study Seneca a lot. And so whenever I read his writings, right, I always try to put it into context. And that context involve quite a few things, right? And I look for that feedback loop to determine whether that's a negative or positive feedback loop, as it relates to my life and how we live today. And I think about, except for technology, right? It's except for the advancement that we've made in technology, pretty much everything that happened back then, we're facing today. I think Michael kind of alluded to that, right? Everything. They have vast economy back then. There's nothing there's nothing you can trump up right now, no pun intended, to say that first century Rome was that much different from what we're dealing with now. And that's the reason why I find most of what happened then philosophically is applicable to my life, because I see those same things happening around me. And even the flaws of Seneca, like I just said, it makes me even respect him more, because I saw him as a man that made some bad choices. I saw him as a man that did things that he regretted, right? Rather than somebody that just kind of paint themselves as being pure, right? Which would obviously be much more challenging for me to study that person. But I really, besides technology, the advancement in that, I would challenge you to tell me what else happened, what we're facing today that they weren't facing. I gotta be honest with you. When you read about ancient Rome, first century Rome, it's very impressive. extremely impressive what they've accomplished. And not just Rome, but they had significant commerce between Egypt and themselves. And back then, Egypt at that time was incredibly developed. The only part of this world within that region that really wasn't developed was Europe at that point. So it's really difficult for me to agree with what you're saying entirely. I see it just extremely relevant to my life, and that's why I find it, and that's why I study it so much. They said history repeat itself, and I'm telling you, it is an absolute fact.
It is a fact, and I so badly want to find words that rise to a level of caution about discussing past civilizations, past people, because I've come to understand that right here and now, as we are humans are facing the exact same problems that everybody else has. The landscape looks different. Political systems don't look different. Human emotions don't look different. There's nothing about humanity that looks different other than material things. The cars, the clothes, the buildings, they look different. The ideas, the problems, these are all around. These have been around since we could barely utter words to each other. So the idea for me that I'm comparing myself to other places in history and being impressed by them, I wanted to be cautious about. But you're right, Mike, you're absolutely right. Because in order for us to listen to these words, they have to have credibility, right? But I would say once you find credibility in the author, stop looking for other comparisons. Stop looking at their existence in their time and saying, oh, I feel tranquility and peace because I have the knowledge that you went through the same things that I went through. Once you can accept that throughout all of human history, it became so much clearer to me, at least, that there's no point in trying to find answers as to why the suffering exists, more so than finding answers to find out, to really practice my actions to get through that suffering in a way that is most beneficial to me. And Stoicism, again, I think, has a lot of stories about people that have successfully practiced this philosophy. But I think you'd be better served to putting your own actions. And that's one thing that really the theme of 2023 for me is action. That the idea, and I can thank Gary John Bishop for this, but you are not your thoughts. Again, we sit here every morning for an hour and talking, using our words. It doesn't mean shit until you put it on paper. The vibrations in our mouth, Ralph said it before, these don't mean anything. You got to be actions. And if you're going to be considering yourself a stoic, it's all about the actions that we're doing, right? So this seclusion idea for me, honestly, is not about anything to do with the thoughts of sitting on a mountaintop or me sitting on a beach staring at waves and pondering. It's about what's the action you're doing. Seneca wrote, that's what he did with his seclusion. He was actively trying to fulfill his purpose in his seclusion because he didn't want, I would suspect, or I would argue, he didn't want the distractions of the masses around him. When he says right there, shun the throng, withdraw from men. Why? Because they provide the distractions that don't allow you to do the work in line with your purpose. It's work, it's actions, it's what you're doing, right? So I don't spend a lot of time, this is all to say that I feel like I'm criticizing Mike for talking about Seneca so much, but I don't ever want to get into a mindset for myself that I'm comparing myself to others and what they did. But it's all about using his words to find ways to apply that belief to me. And the seclusion that I have in 2023 as a white man in America, I've got to find a way to use that seclusion the best of my ability. And again, I think it's coming down to the Stoic principles or practices of journaling, meditation, and then having these things, So, Michael, guys, let you know I got to go in like 10 minutes, so I'm going to shut this down. But I'll keep it open to you guys keep going if you want. So, Michael.
So I would just have to say you can't really wrong Mike for talking about Seneca when our topic is one of his letters. Just
No.
say,
No. Mike knows it. Mike knows it. I want him to.
I know. I'm being funny. I agree with everything you said, Eric, but one thing, and it's not challenging it, but yes, the landscape has changed, but the way we deal with our faculty of reason and that it's fallible, right? That's been the challenge for all these years. So when we get down to it, I don't want to get too technical, but I'm going to bring this together. It always comes down to like at least rational emotive behavioral therapy and cognitive CBT has embraced. It comes down to these 8 core emotions, right? Anxiety, depression, what is it? Shame, guilt, anger, hurt, jealousy, and envy. So going to what you talked about, my comparing myself to other people just instills a bunch of, most likely is going to instill a bunch of jealousy and envy, right? And so what they were talking about then, that was a challenge then. Yeah, different landscape. But I also remember that we're only hearing about the people who were very rich and powerful from that time. We weren't really hearing from the everyday person. But when we look at that emotional, I mean, well, it's when we look at how we look at things today, it's the same thing. So if back then, if I was comparing myself to somebody who had a better house than I did, right, or a different way of living than I did, I could become either jealous of their activity or envious of the person. Even today, the same thing. And just going back to my Stoic cave example, if I create my little Stoic cave or hutch or whatever it turns out to be, and then I go and see yours, and yours might be bigger or better or whatever, right? I'm even there, I'm comparing. And what Stoicism offers to me is to start comparing me to me, right? Comparing me to where I want to be, comparing me to, I always say, go back to highest self, because that's a huge, consideration. So I don't think much has changed by way of emotion, landscape for sure. But the core things that really disturb us and bother us and rattle us spiritually and emotionally, it all goes back to how am I reasoning? What are my beliefs, right? And challenging those things to grow to be a better person.
I agree
Can I
completely.
add something too, please, Eric, on that, what you're saying with yesterday and today being, I would say that we are the same outside of the breadth of detonation. We're capable to destroy a larger area of place. And so if you choose as well to be in seclusion, but have done something wrong, you're on the lam, and who's looking for them? Eric, is Interpol, that one guy that you said was doing it wherever in isolation. And why people? So I like to stay in seclusion because I love to study Stoicism, but was told by my therapist, I must take my weekends. So I am. And the reason why we would involve people if we are practicing Stoicism is for the incidental learning. So if you have someone who is blind and someone who is sighted, and their mother is making them breakfast, making them toast, who is sighted will know that bread and toast are the same ingredient. Who is blind will not maybe realize that they are in fact the same piece of bread. They think it's two different things. So we learn that, and practicing Stoicism, everything, no matter what we're doing, we should be discerning and taking it in and analyzing it in a way where it will suit us best. And like I said often to you that I'm a Pollyanna, so I will say that when they say money can't make you happy, but if you are practicing Stoicism, and last week, or no, was it last week? Yeah, when you're away, we did look at Seneca, and what he said was, what I advise you to do is not to be unhappy before the crisis comes. So I am practicing that out of default, like I said, because I have that. So when I say money can never make you happy, it shouldn't make you happy if you're practicing Stoicism. It should make you happier, because you're already happy and now you got money. I'm happier. I'm not going to be less happy.
Thank you so much, Gail. You're absolutely right. And, as I sit here, I got to wrap this up soon, but the one idea that I can't pull myself away from is comparison. And I feel like we're doing that a lot with this letter, because if you're secluding yourself, what are you secluding yourself from? Other men, other things. And certainly there's an aspect of distractions. But, both of the Mike and Michael's talked about it. I've talked about it. Mason probably didn't because he's wiser than all of us. But, the adage, comparison really is a thief. And it's so true to me. I did it for so long. And that was really a big point of my unhappiness for a long time. And if you think about it, if you're in a prison, what's the default going to be? Unhappiness. Why? Because you're comparing your situation to others and you're thinking, I want freedom that others have. And the idea that Stoicism is instilling in us is There should never be the comparison to begin with, because the moment you compare your situation to others, you're stealing your own potential for joy. If you look at your own situation right now and say, this is what I have, I'm going to choose to find happiness. Mason, when you first started out in boot camp and you guys were running, what did you do when you ran? You didn't just run, you sang, right? In the military, you find a way to make your situation happy. And when you're tired and wet and cold, the person next to you, you find ways to entertain yourselves. You find ways to tell dirty jokes and make yourselves happy. And I remember sitting on that beach and I'm looking at a crab, and down in Cozumel, they have a really bad kelp problem right now. And there was this crab on the beach, and this motherfucker was happy. He was eating all the kelp out there, right? By himself, nobody's stealing his kelp. And I go, that is the happiest being on this planet right now. He won the lottery, literally. He has all of this kelp to eat. Nobody's going to steal it from him. He's happier than anybody. He's not looking at me sitting in my chair, drinking a Dos Equis. So you can compare yourself to other human beings and say, they have things that I want. But why do it? The first question I would ask you is, why are you comparing your journey to theirs? They're not comparable. They weren't born from the same womb. They weren't born to parents with the same bank accounts. They didn't have the same traumas you did. Nothing in your life is comparable. If it is, then certainly compare it. But no other person is comparable to you. So stop the comparisons. Go seclude yourself from comparing yourself to anybody, anything, in any way, shape, or form, personal, professional, it doesn't matter. You got to focus on what your happiness is. And if you're not happy because your accomplishments and your efforts haven't gotten you to the fruits of what you want to do, then go do the work. That's what Stoicism tells you to do. You got to put in the work to find your happiness, if that's what your happiness is going to find. So I really take away from Seneca here that for me, and applying it to my life and what I've heard today in this meeting, is we're comparing ourselves a lot to others and what they have and what their purpose is and where they're going in life. But you first got to look at your own existence and find your happiness, and then make it happy. Choose to make it happy. If you're running and you don't like running, sing the damn song. If you're sitting on a beach by yourself, look at somebody else's existence and go, your existence is crap. My existence is beautiful. Just so happened I look at a crab rather than the couple sitting next to me that drove away in a Mercedes, because their journey is not the same as mine, right? So my goal this week is to really seclude myself from comparing my existence to anybody else and really focus on the existence that I have and the time that I spend in my day finding happiness. And whether that's, finding a 20-minute drive home that I can talk to myself and get myself out of wanting to push my kid off a cliff, that's what it is, or going for a run and singing songs, right? You got to find your own happiness, and that starts by not comparing yourself to others. So
quick question. You don't have to respond to it because I know you got to go, Eric. Is seclusion natural or unnatural? That's the question I want to hand with everybody. That's it.
I got to tell you right now, from my gut reaction is it's unnatural. You got to force yourself to do it, right? Because we automatically want to compare ourselves to others. We want to find other people to show us the way rather than think for ourselves and find our own way. Finding our own way is uncomfortable and hard, but that's where the happiness is at, I would say. But
all right,
anyway.
take care.
It's unnatural until it becomes natural, because you're supposed to be practicing it daily.
Exactly. Right. Guys, thank you so much. Great conversation. Can't wait. Hopefully everything can come Wednesday night. We'll do it again. All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.